The Russian military is quickly fielding new unmanned systems into its ranks. To learn lessons from recent conflicts, and a new paper out of the CNA Russia Studies program shows how Russia tested unmanned systems in places such as Syria and how those lessons could play a role in its conflict with Ukraine. Joining us now is co-author of the paper, Samuel Bendett. Samuel is an adjunct senior research fellow at CNAS and an advisor to CNA's Russia Studies program. Samuel, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Give us a little bit of a snapshot of where Russia is with its unmanned systems.
Over the past decade, the Russian military has invested heavily in the development and the procurement of different types of unmanned and autonomous military systems. I should also include a small caveat. Russian military likes to use the words autonomous, unmanned, and robotic rather loosely, especially when it comes to military journalists writing those articles in Russia. In fact, most of what Russia calls autonomous military force is in fact remote controlled military force. And so over the past decade, Russia invested heavily in the development of unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs. Russia today has probably the second largest UAV fleet at around 2,000 different types of UAVs. Most of them are for intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and target acquisition, or ISTAR. Some of the UAVs are now becoming combat capable. Russia is starting to acquire a small number of combat UAVs. Overall, most of the UAVs in Russian service today are ISR capable and are remote controlled and can provide coverage at up to 200 kilometers for its operators. Russian military also operates a number of unmanned ground vehicles, or UGVs, mostly in the demining and unexploded ordnance clearance capacity. And Russia is testing and fielding a number of unmanned maritime systems, unmanned underwater vehicles, UUVs, and unmanned surface vehicles as well, some of which are starting to become also combat capable as Russian military seeks to locate and destroy mines underwater and on the surface.
So a little bit of a snapshot. To sum it up, I think you mentioned they're doing intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, as well as combat control and electronic warfare. I think I read that in your paper.
Yes, that's correct. Electronic warfare is emerging as a very significant capability for the Russian military. Russian military has invested in EW in general over the past 20 years. It has multiple systems that can provide EW operations at different distances against different types of targets and signals. And some of that capability is now becoming UAV capable. In fact, Russian military has a UAV called Orlan 10, which is capable of carrying several electronic warfare systems on board for hijacking and jamming cell towers and cell signals. In fact, the system is called Lear 3, and it has been sighted in Syria. It has also been sighted in eastern Ukraine over the past several years, and remains Russia's sort of forward-pointing UAV-capable electronic warfare capability.
Going back to the ISR, to the surveillance part, one thing about your study that really struck me, one part of it was that in the Cold War, they weren't very good at surveillance, at battlefield awareness, right? So that was kind of their weak point. Where are they at right now?
That's correct. Soviet military couldn't really see battlefield in real time, and so some of the strikes that it was planning for would have probably been late in a rapidly changing battlefield situation. It's UAVs, and Soviet Union was one of the leading manufacturers of unmanned aerial vehicles at the time, were more like missiles with wings, and they couldn't really transmit data in real time as well. So a UAV had to come back, and then recorded information had to be retrieved. What Russian military has today is a real-time capability to observe the battlefield. And this is something that they are actually advertising in all of its military publications and in writings, that the Russian military gained this capacity over a number of years and has practiced it extensively in Syria. This capability is becoming a very essential part of what the Russians called reconnaissance strike and reconnaissance fire contours, where UAVs are essentially eyes and ears for targets on the ground. And as UAVs transmit real-time data back to the command and control centers in the field or in Russia, Russian military is capable of striking targets as soon as it identifies them. And so this reconnaissance fire and reconnaissance strike capability is a capacity that the Russian military has been perfecting practically on a daily basis.
And the Russian military has had years of practice of basically lab work. Tell us where they've actually developed this technology.
Russian military used Syria as a military laboratory. It claimed officially that over 300 different weapon systems were tested in Syria beginning in 2015. Every senior Russian military officer across all of its services has rotated through Syria so that the Russian military command today has the knowledge and capacity of fighting this type of conflict. And when it comes to using unmanned aerial vehicles, Syria was truly a watershed for the Russian military. It was able to field multiple ISR models at once that operated at different distances. At any given point, up to 70 UAVs were operating in the air, covering a very wide area in Syria. And so Russian military today thinks of UAVs as absolutely essential in any type of combat. And we cite Russian military officials in our paper stating so.
And is it right, did I read that right, that there are far more flight hours of UAVs than manned aircraft in Syria? In some of those
That's
conflicts?
correct. Around 2017, 2018, the number of hours flown by UAVs has far surpassed its manned aircraft flights. And this number has continued to increase as the Russian military recognizes the significant capability that an ISR drone can bring to bear.
Are they where they want to be?
Well, I think what the Russian military is thinking right now is that they have to move from the ISR only capability to fielding combat UAVs. This was a gap that they experienced in Syria. This was a gap that they knew they had going into Syria as they observed leading UAV powers like United States, like Israel, like China, field multiple unmanned combat aerial vehicles. And so today, Russian industry is working on multiple unmanned combat aerial vehicles, or UCAVs. They're working on loitering munition drones. They're working on loyal wingman models. And so in December of last year, Russian military actually acquired its first combat UAV called Orion. And so Russian military today is starting to increase the acquisition capacity for Orion and other types of combat drones. So Russian military knows that it needed these combat UAVs yesterday. It absolutely confirmed that it needed such capacity as it watched Azerbaijan inflict heavy casualties on the Armenian military with the help of combat UAVs and loitering munitions in the Nagorno-Karabakh war in late 2020. So this gap is starting to close slowly but surely.
And I saw the list in your study of all the potential drones they could have, and the name that popped up a lot was Rostec, the conglomerate, the Russian conglomerate that makes a lot of these high-tech devices. Are most of these drones they're using built in-house, built in Russia, or are they importing anything?
They used to import several drone models back in 2009 and 2010 when the Russian industrial capacity was a fraction of today's, its military industrial capacity. They needed to plug a capability, and so they purchased several older Israeli models, which they renamed for Post and Zastava. Today, all of its drone force is manufactured in Russia, and the Russian Ministry of Defense is actually asking its military industrial complex to manufacture not just the airframes, but also the military electronics, the sensors, the optics, and everything that goes inside a UAV. So this type of import substitution is a very important policy that was imposed in Russia after the sanctions in 2014 and 2015. And today, the MOD actually requires its industrial companies to field a capacity that would have essentially over 50% of components manufactured in Russia proper.
Samuel, do you know if Russia's gonna develop so much of this technology they might plan to make it a moneymaker for them?
Absolutely. They actually talked about exports early on, and Russian military today is exporting its Orlan 10 UAV to several international customers, to customers in the former Soviet space. They actually announced that they want to take 10% of the military UAV market in the coming years. That may be an aspirational goal, but Russian military does have proven UAV capacity. It can export UAVs that have been proven themselves in Syria, and so these include Orlan 10 UAV. It includes an Aileron 3 tactical UAV. It even includes an export version of its newly acquired Orion unmanned combat aerial vehicle, as well as its loitering munition models, the Kub and the Lancet, that were also tested in Syria. So absolutely, Russia wants to sell UAVs. It wants to make money off of them. And it wants to capture up to 10% of the global military UAV market if that's a possibility.
It sounds like they become highly capable. Do you have any insights on how they might plan to use this technology in Ukraine?
Well, I think if the widespread military conflict breaks out in Ukraine, they're going to use these UAVs in a similar capacity to they use in Syria. We actually note that in our paper. So these UAVs are going to become an essential part of Russia's reconnaissance fire and reconnaissance strike contour. There will be electronic warfare UAVs. There will be target acquisition UAVs that will guide artillery, multiple launch rocket systems, other ground-based and aerial assets at the Ukrainian targets. And with so many UAVs in Russian military service, they can actually bring a very significant capability to this Ukrainian fight.
Samuel, Russia had been using big drones in Syria and in other theaters, and they had a problem with small quadcopters that you can get out of the store. And this was fascinating in your paper. It's a little bit of a, if you can't beat them, join them. What's going on with the quadcopters?
That's correct. Russian military was hammered by these small do-it-yourself quadricopter multi-rotor drones that could drop small-scale munition that were very difficult to identify and were difficult to shoot down also. And so Russian military, starting in 2019, has started a widespread acquisition of small quadricopter and multi-rotor drones across all of its services. And this acquisition continued into 2021. And Russian military wants to use them for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. It wants to use them in limited capacity, much like the militants use them in Syria. They could be potentially useful in urban conflict because these are small machines that can navigate into relatively confined spaces.
Well, Samuel, that's a lot to think about, and we're going to see how this plays out. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.